Hello and welcome to another episode of Exchanges. Got questions from you guys over the last couple of months around going back into the behaviour area and actually getting somebody to come and talk about the behaviour of their money, about why we do what we do, which is very much a passion of mine, as you well and truly know. So I got in Rebecca Maher, who is one of the best in the business at this. In fact, so much so, she's even started her own major firm off the back of this concept, which is really diving in to going back to the start, looking at why behavior and our perception with it, our use of it, whether we see it as the root of all evil or as the benefit or beneficia of all of the things that we can achieve, in her whole mantra. And that's why I thought she'd be great to get onto Exchanges and to have a really good discussion around this area. So with that, here is Rebecca Maher. Rebecca Maher, welcome to Exchanges. I first want to get you to talk about what brought you into the world of money, because you've got a very interesting story and you've got a very interesting career/business that you now run.
Yes. Thanks for having me.
Well, you and I are going to deal through this a lot. I can tell this already. But tell me about your journey through your money first.
Yeah, absolutely. My path into this kind of work, the industry, I guess, wasn't really linear. But looking back, all of the dots have connected for me in some way. So if I go right back to the beginning, just to give everyone a little bit of an intro, I actually started my career after uni or during uni working in my mother's business as an immigration agent. So this is going back 20 years. And it was a great first step, but I wanted to ultimately, after that experience, branch out and do something closer to my degree, which was in business and finance. And I'd always had an interest in money and business and how people make financial decisions. So I was actually, as a kid, I've always been pretty good with money. I set goals, I saved up my money. I didn't get pocket money, but I saved whatever money I did get through doing jobs and things that my parents set up for me in the school holidays or helped them with their work in an ad hoc kind of way. And I even, tracked my money. So one of my earliest memories was my dad gave me a ledger for my money box when I was 8. My youngest daughter's now 8, so I actually remembered this quite recently when they got money boxes for Christmas last year. So he gave me this ledger so I could record my money coming in and going out of my money box. Can you believe? So
that's some serious dad present there. That has dad present written all over it. Like, what can I get? Oh, I know. Let's get them homework to talk about money.
Let's get them a money ledger. How exciting. And maybe it was personality or just because it's what you do when you're a kid and someone sets this up for you as a habit, you kind of just lean into it. So I got in the habit of using it. And then, I don't know whether structure came naturally to me or it came naturally to me because of that habit that I built. But money was always something that I was kind of in control of. But I did grow up in a house where I had 2 very different money personalities. So I had one parent who was a big saver, in some ways struggled to kind of experience any real joy with their money. And then on the other hand, I had another parent, and I won't disclose who was who, but who was a big spender, who sort of chased it more freely, was more open with it, used it pretty much for spontaneity, for joy, for all the things that, they wanted to do and see in the world. So I grew up from a very early age, sort of sitting in the middle, learning how to not just manage money, but also observe the moods, the tensions, the stress that comes with money and the different personality types around money. So that's a little bit of my sort of early money story.
Because the reason I wanted to start you there is that you're like me, you are very much into the behavior side of money and your whole, ethos and what you do is around behavior, and getting you to sort of start there was deliberate because you already started to use the terms that I now want to get you to sort of, explain about what you're passionate about, but also what you do. You know, behavioral experience and behavioral learnings are so intertwined with not just money and money culture, but money belief, money action. For the next part of this that therefore comes is, what are you taking out at the moment is the biggest behavioral sort of collation of the people that you work with that is holding them back, but also what you see as the behaviors that are actually moving forward? Because Australia doesn't have a great relationship, I would argue, with money. We start from tall poppy syndrome, those that have, those that don't. It is more of a sort of an ego-driven, keeping up with the Joneses opinion. How have you
Yep.
seen that devolve? Because behavior is, I know, absolutely your thing, and therefore, what you're doing now with what you learned as a kid, but also now using that in your business life.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a really big question because
Yeah,
you're
good luck.
right. I mean, thanks, because behavior really is, it's at the beginning. It's central to everything, and it really is the beginning of everything. I was trying to download a new app on my phone the other day, and it was for a fancy sort of design tool thing that we use for some of our software engineering. And I got this message saying, your operating system isn't sufficient for this fancy new app that you want to download. So I had to go and upgrade the operating system on the phone, and then I could download the app. And it kind of just, as it does for me, because I'm constantly thinking about behavior and money and things, I kind of was able to draw this analogy for myself, which I've used a few times since then. But it's a bit like that with money. A lot of the time we're jumping to the how and the what we need to do and the product and, the thing, right? Or even the decision that needs to be made. And we're trying to piece together our financial life and our path to creating our wealth and growing more money with new strategies, new investment vehicles, new ways of doing things from a cash flow and budgeting perspective, without really ever spending much time looking at the operating system, which is how we think and feel about money. And what happens when you do that is that it just sometimes there's this massive disconnect. You can be using the same strategies and using the same investment vehicles and doing all the same things, but getting different results. And the real explanation for that lies with yourself, fundamentally. So coming back to your question about money and behavior, I think we talk a lot about attitudes. We talk a lot about beliefs around money and money stories. But even going deeper than that, I think a lot of this sits at the identity level, how we personally identify when it comes to or with money. And then I think this also knocks on to a lot of the cultural issues that you talked about. So I'll just kind of wrap all of that up into my answer.
Yeah, please do.
So I think a lot of the shame and stigma around money in Australia does come down to culture, both our national culture and our personal identity. So let me unpack what I mean by that. So it's my belief that culturally we're really deeply conflicted about money. On the one hand, and you mentioned this, we glorify financial success, especially in property, as an example. You're considered a success if you own 10 investment properties, but somehow you're still, an amateur or a work in progress if you only own 9. So there's this endless sort of chase to prove you're financially savvy, even when sometimes that is quietly unsustainable. But at the same time, as we are celebrating or glorifying financial success, we also have this tall poppy syndrome baked into our DNA here in Australia. So we admire success, but not too much. So people, I think, feel like they don't really know how to talk about money without sounding boastful on the one hand, or clueless on the other hand, or ashamed because they're too successful or not successful enough. And it creates this kind of cultural confusion. So We celebrate wealth, but we ultimately don't feel comfortable or even know how to really talk honestly about it without coming into some kind of, or coming up against some kind of cultural tension. So that's at the sort of national cultural level. And then I touched on this concept of like personal identity. So that identity piece is really key, and it takes a while, as simple as it sounds as a concept, to really actually deeply sit and think through your own individual identity around money. So every single one of us has internalized some kind of story with who we are around money or with
I'd
money.
agree.
So some people are acutely aware of it. And even if you are aware of it, you know, like myself, I find myself still unpacking that from time to time. So for
I find
some,
myself drifting between them. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, I know that I do X, but if something happens, I'll drift into Y
yep,
and readily flick between the two of them.
yeah. So I don't think it's something that you ever sort of unpack and then like, oh, okay, you know, one and done kind of thing. It's an evolving story, really. And I think that's just another thing, if I can sidestep and make a note about that too. We kind of talk about this idea of money story as though it's something that we need to go back and investigate, figure out, course correct, and then off we go. But realistically, there's a part of that story that, yes, is formed, you know, in our early years, but there's a part that's evolved since then too. Like you just said, you know, as we come into contact or run up against life and all its dramas and, you know, nuances, there's new things being written and thought and said, and we constantly have to revisit them. So that's just something else. But coming back to this story, for some people, that story is really empowering, right? So things like, I'm good with money. I've always been good with money. I'm the responsible one. I keep track of my money. I'm someone who works in this industry, so therefore I am, you know, good
X.
with money, X,
Yeah.
whatever that thing is.
Yeah.
But even that story can be isolating. And you know, if you're the one that everyone relies on, or if you're the capable one, or if you're the one that people typically come to for help or some guidance around numbers or finances, it can still feel incredibly lonely to carry that role silently, especially when things aren't going well. So, and that may or may not be anything to do with anything you've done or haven't done about money, because if we remember, money is relational, so you're very subjected to what's happening at a financial level, typically from your spouse, your partner, your family, even your friends. And it's also, you know, very much tied to macroeconomic trends and health and mental health. So there's lots of things beyond just our own personal responsibility that drive this well-being position we have around money. So even with that empowering story, there's still, you know, this issue of missing support sometimes. For others, you know, that identity is limiting, and things like, I'm not good with numbers, or people like me don't invest in those sorts of things. Who am I to go and buy an investment property or two? Who am I to build wealth, even in some instances? So these stories, you know, can really shape not just how we spend, but how we see our place in the world. So I think the cultural piece is really interesting to me as well, because there is such a contradiction there, which makes it confusing. And then when you layer that or go deeper with the personal piece, then you've got another layer of complexity at an individual level, which is also jumping in and having an impact on you. So that's why I think it's just so important that everybody understands this behavioral piece, or at least, you know, brings some awareness to it just over time, so that you can start to unpack some of it and see where and how it is influencing your life.
Wow. Okay. Massive answer, because I gave you a massive question.
Sorry.
So no, brilliant, because I gave you a massive question. So there was a few things there I just want to sort of go back on sort of and look at first and foremost, which is, I think one of the interesting parts you sort of talked about there is your talking about the fact that part of culture at the moment is getting to the finish line before you even start. So
Mm.
your products, your how to do it for me, do it now. I need this, I need that. What you're talking about there and what you do now is before that, right? So what you're saying is that you actually need to run the race. You need to go through the steps from the start line to get to inverted commas, whatever the finish line looks like to that person or that group, what have you. Do you feel that we are becoming more do it for me than do it myself in finance? Because I mean, Australia is very proud in the fact that we are a DIY country and very proud on the idea that we do things ourselves. But when it comes to this, would you argue that more and more of them are turning around and saying, do it for me because I don't want to make the mistake. I don't know enough. I don't understand enough. And then again, it brings in the next behavioral part, which is loss. If the decision I make in my DIY making leads to loss, I don't think I could handle blaming myself. Whereas if it happens because of something else or somebody else, I can then make the external, basically self-attribution bias and blame the environment rather than blaming myself.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Evan. I do think that we have shifted over time to a bit of a or more of a DIY attitude
General rule. Yeah.
as a group. Yeah, as a general rule. Um, I think that's I think that's for a couple of different converging kind of reasons, though. I think one is that at an industry level, we've had a lot of things come along that have meant that the advisor pool is shrinking at a massive rate, and compliance and regulatory burden has meant costs of advice have gone up for the consumer. So we've kind of morphed into this environment where for the average Australian, accessibility to seeing and working with over the long term a financial advisor in a done for you kind of arrangement is just becomes very difficult, nigh impossible for a lot of people. And at the same time, I spoke about the internet and having been around for a very long time, we've had massive growth in social media being used as a source of financial inspiration and education and community, which has given people a level of direction and confidence, rightly or wrongly, about how they can be more self-directed with their finances. So I think that's really had an inflationary effect in terms of this DIY approach. I still think, though, that there is a large pool of people who even might be sitting in that DIY space more than someone who's looking for a done for you approach, who would still who are still looking for what I call a done with
Yeah,
you
that's a good
kind
term.
of solution. And I think that's where financial coaching really sits in a way. The problem with the DIY space is that you just have to have all the answers to a degree for yourself, and you have to be able to make those decisions independently. And that, that's through your own education, your own experiences, and maybe some of the people and communities that you speak to and belong to. But again, that's at a very group level, as opposed to having that one-on-one block of space and time to really unpack what is your own set of circumstances, your own goals, your own direction, your own wants
Do you
and
think products
needs.
are part of that answer as well?
So
Do you think things like passive investing, which is just, almost exponentially, it's been around forever, but exponentially has taken off probably in the last 10 years, I'd argue, with, exchange traded funds, is part of the reason why DIYing is up there, along with, as you correctly point out, is advice is really getting expensive. It's too hard to run it as a business. Is that also part of the reason it's happening? Is that basically, passive investing is just the option, so you just go with that?
yeah, I think that's a very big part of it. The accessibility of product and solutions has definitely created more of a DIY trajectory. But again, people are still we still haven't seen huge improvements overall in terms of confidence and, you know, how people feel about money and how it's contributing to their life and lifestyle. So we still have, you know, whole communities on the internet and in and around these products and solutions, talking about, you know, how difficult it is and how hard it is to get ahead and how hard it is to feel, you know, like you're moving the needle on, you know, living the kind of life you want and how your money supports that. So even with the massive amount of product creation and digital pathways, and a massive lowering of the barriers to being self-directed and accessing these financial products, we still haven't had an equal or commensurate amount of increase in confidence and clarity and happiness around our finances. So my argument is that there is still a very big part of the DIYer's journey that is looking for that human element to act as a counterweight to their own, you know, their own decision making, their own understanding of what they're doing and how it fits into their life and bigger picture. And also, it's very difficult to be self-aware enough about your financial identity and be able to look at that. Like, it's only when you work in this industry or you're just someone who's got a natural affinity to behavioral finance and things, that you might spend a lot of your pastime thinking about things like this and being introspective. But, you know, the average person is too busy being introspective about
Yes,
other areas of their life, or, you know, or leaning into physical fitness, or, you know, trying to become a better parent, or trying to improve their work skills. They're not all sitting around thinking about what it is about
yeah.
them and how they manage money
So
that
that
could be
means it
getting in the
brings me to the
way.
question that I think I need to ask, because I can hear what you're saying and I know what you mean. But can you sort of go through then what wealth is? Because both of us keep using this term wealth, you know, building wealth and what wealth is. But I think what you've just sort of highlighted there is exactly that point, which is wealth is not just a capital thing, is it?
No,
Yeah. And so
not really.
can you
The
explain
more,
how and why we use the term wealth? It's much more holistic than probably what I think the majority of people will look at it from.
yeah, I think it's, and it's all
Yeah.
contextual too, right? So I do understand, you know, like if we're talking about finance and we use the term wealth, the majority of people will think that we are referring to, you know, the accumulation of assets, let's say, to put it very plainly, which means stacking more money, growing the acorn, you know, building financial wealth, which means money and assets in that context. But, you know, wealth, you can have wealth in all kinds of different areas of life. And, you know, relationship wealth, you can have physical wealth and in health, that is, you know, you can have wealth in terms of time and mindset and all kinds of things. So when we look at wealth in the context of financial well-being as opposed to financial services or advice, what we're really talking about is how is it that money as a resource ultimately, you know, marries up with the rest of your life? Is it an enabler of the things that you want to be doing, and how you want to live your life? Is it a detractor? And then what is it that we can investigate or unpack to be able to help you better make decisions around your money, manage your money to live a wealthy life, and whatever that means to you, basically. So it's more abstract in the sense that we're not speaking about nominal values, invest ways to accumulate more money necessarily. We're more taking a step back and saying, how is it that this thing that we have, that we all use to buy things, sell things, you know, and move about the world in our day-to-day lives, how is it helping us build wealth, not just in a dollar sense, but in a life
Yeah. And I
time
would argue
sense?
exactly the same point. I mean, I've always said that, you know, all capital is a conduit or a potential to turn one asset into another. And that therefore brings me probably to my final question before I ask my end up final question for you, which is, you've discussed then around, the overall well-being that wealth brings and where it sits in that idea is, how do you therefore define that you're wealthy? Is it the happiness that it brings you? Is it the fact that experience buying, accumulating to your nth degree is not always the answer? Where is that other part of that discussion, which is, wealth is not just accumulation, wealth is actual use. Where do we get on that sort of scale as well? Because I think that's the last part of the discussion, is understanding that use is actually part of the whole concept, not just the accumulation.
Absolutely. And it's all swings and roundabouts, really, because, I mean, at the end of the day, that's the conversation that is the hardest one to have, and it's really, it's difficult to even start. And where do you start and where do you stop with it? Like, it's an ongoing thing as well, I think. Again, it's not just like setting a traditional goal where you sit down and, okay, I'm going to put this much away so that I can achieve X, Y, Z in this time frame. And, there's no real start and stop with it. It's what do I want to do with my life? How is that, how is that values aligned for me? What do I really want to achieve? And what do I need? Or how does money and my finances contribute to that picture? So it's a hard thing to do. And it's also hard. It gets a layer harder when you add in other people to that decision, that conversation as well. So if you're on your own, you can sit down and, journal and really think about it and talk about it with yourself and, spend some time mulling over the pros and cons and ultimately go with what you want. When you're in a partnership, whatever that looks like, you've got two people on a journey traveling in parallel and you need to have that conversation. You've got your independent views, but then there's shared goals and challenges. And so there's another layer of complexity to work through on that. And then when you add dependent children to that, then you've got another set of concerns and things to weigh into that conversation. Aging parents, adult things, children, it's all a big relational pie, if you like. So I think the answer to the question is that, how does somebody define wealth? Well, it's hyper personal, and it has to be something that you think about and come to some kind of decision around in order to not just make financial decisions that are going to help you or, work in support of those goals, but also to avoid this kind of like ongoing disappointment with your financial situation. Because if we go back to that earlier conversation around, the cultural piece and how, like there's a conflict there when we talk about money. There's billionaires in the world. There's people living happy lives on, 5-figure incomes. So ultimately, happiness is not tied to the number, but the number is part of the happiness equation. So what we really need to do is just start with the big picture and the financial well-being piece, and then look at how the money piece weaves into that. I think
it does. I mean, it's a question that's it's almost, I asked you probably how long is a piece of string, because it is so interpersonal. So therefore I am going to give you the final, massive universe question, which is, Rebecca Maher, if you're in charge for just one day, what would you do?
It's a hard question, Evan, but it's a really good one. So for me, I think if I was in charge for a day, and I'll keep it tied to work and the sort of the mission-driven piece that I've been on for a while, is that I'd make sure every Australian has access to real-time financial support. So the kind that actually helps them make decisions, not just read more information or feel like DIY is the only option, having spoken about that. So to do that, I guess what I would look at doing is embedding financial coaching into the systems that people already trust. So whether it's super funds, their employer, or their bank, or even as an extension of their advice relationships, because that's where the opportunity to have mass impact is, in terms of financial well-being. If we're talking about coaching being the solution to helping people make those decisions about their life, about their happiness, about how money is going to play a part in that, and then move on to what they need to do next. So that's what I do. I said, because ultimately we really need to start supporting people before they reach breaking point. And if we can give everybody the kind of solution that gives them one front door to walk through, not a lineup of doors that creates confusion, decision paralysis, overwhelm. You know, we've got doors for digital advice, we've got doors for fintech, we've got doors for super, we've got doors for insurance, we've got doors for credit, we've got doors for debt. We've got lots of doors, and a plethora of education, but nothing that's really the connective tissue between all of those things.
Rebecca Maher, thank you so much for joining us today. Big thank you to Rebecca. She's got an incredible story and really, really in depth in what she thinks about this space, showing very clearly about why she is always looking to the base root issue, or not just issue, but opportunity that comes from the behaviour and our behaviour with money. I thank her so much for coming on. I really do hope you enjoyed that exchange that she gave with us. As always, to you as well, thank you so much for listening, watching, or wherever you're getting this information from. We love having you on to this exchange, and it's becoming such a great community, so thank you. But please don't forget, if you can, subscribe to wherever you get this, listening to or watching. Don't forget, we've also got the email, exchanges@evanlucas.com.au. If you've got ideas, thoughts, or even have an idea for somebody to come on to Exchanges, we're always open to having guests. So please, if you can, send through those numbers. But until next week, thank you again for joining me, and I look forward to taking you through another Exchanges in a week's time.